This is Lessons from the School of Cyber Hard Knocks. I'm your host, Joe Saunders, founder and CEO of RunSafe Security. This podcast is about cyber leaders and their toughest lessons in the cyber battlegrounds. Welcome to another episode of Lessons from the School of Cyber Hard Knocks. And today's guest is Mike Vesey, CEO of ID Ramp. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Joe. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I look forward to the discussion, talking about, what you're doing today. And also maybe we can weave in some Iowa football at some point. But
Certainly.
First of all, let's tell us about ID Ramp and your role and responsibilities and kind of where you guys are going.
Sure. Yeah, happy. So ID Ramp is comes out of many years of my work in the identity field. And we kept seeing the same problems over and over. We saw organizations and companies struggling with the same challenges as identity systems came and went, and really service enablement and the whole orchestration of identity across the service landscape. And so ID Ramp really was kind of the culmination of that. We developed this amazing platform that allows you to just it's basically a big mixing board, for identity. You can bring in all these different identities, whether they're enterprise identities or social identities or self-sovereign identities, and you can really orchestrate the delivery of services across across this platform. So it really helps organizations with traditional identity challenges, right? How do we, whether it's merger and acquisition or other things where identity systems are coming and going, and then the real key thing that we're doing over the past few years that's really exciting is we're integrating and really building a bridge to decentralized verification and decentralized issuance. So we understand the world's full of these identity silos. We will, we'll kill those off as quickly as we can in the future. But until that time, we need to build these bridges. And so we can issue decentralized credential-based authentication for any existing identity source by plugging it in and using standard federation protocols like SAML, OAuth, OIDC, things like that. And then we can, on the other side of that, we can decentralize the authentication out to the service as well. So think of it as an identity protocol translator, I guess, as it moves through the ecosystem. So really good stuff there. And then we rounded that out with all of the, of course, APIs and SDKs and things that we need to support that. And it's a pretty exciting place that we're at right now.
Very good. Sounds exciting. And, you used a term in there I'd love for you to explain in more detail. So you talked about self-sovereign identity. How is that? Can you describe that for folks and what are the implications of self-sovereign identity given your platform?
Sure. Yeah. And so there's self-sovereign identity in itself, just the term is kind of polarizing, and we have to be careful how we use that. When we at ID Ramp think of self-sovereign identity, we aren't going to the full extent where, okay, you're picking up all of these attributes as you evolve your way through life. And this is, of course, how we will do this in the future. We're going to accumulate education credentials, our driver's license credentials, travel credentials, vaccination credentials, right? All of these things, we're going to pick these up and we're going to carry them with us. And we're going to provide the ability to for that information to be verified independently, right? That's where distributed ledgers come in and all that fun stuff. Right now, ID Ramp says we have some bigger challenges that are facing us today. And those are things like passwords are still a thing. Can you believe passwords are still a thing, right? We're in 2021 and we're still dealing with password, and we're dealing with impersonation fraud, and we're dealing with all of these things. So if we use this technology that often gets cast as self-sovereign as just a cryptographic way to eliminate a password, my job is complete, right? We've moved the needle, and tomorrow's problems are tomorrow's problems. So when we think of a bring your own identity, decentralized identity, self-sovereign identity, we look at it holistically. So it is all of those things that I mentioned, yes. But at the end of the day, right now, for the vast majority of our customers and the world, we just need a way to simply say, eliminate this password. Let's reduce all of this friction, and our developers don't have to worry about it, and our IT organizations and security organizations don't have to worry about reset processes and all of that. So we have A lot of the things that we do in the ID Ramp platform are laser focused toward just moving that needle. Let's start the process. It's called zero trust. It's called, there's all these different things that people are calling this journey. And it all starts with a better trust relationship between our consumers and our services. And if those consumers are coming from a siloed identity source, then so be it. If they're coming from a self-initiated scan of my driver's license, or the DMV issues me a credential, awesome. We're moving the needle even further. But for me, and we always are very careful, especially going into pitches within enterprise or public sector organizations, to lead out with, self-sovereign identity, right? There's a lot of meanings to that, and you have to be really careful with that. So I've spent way too much time qualifying that, but I want to make sure to the listener that this isn't a philosophical conversation, right? This is just us as a community building a better trust relationship between the services we're delivering and the identities that are consuming those services.
Absolutely. And you say, and I guess there's a lot of incremental things that need to happen before we're really truly talking about self-sovereign identity. And you pick up a really good pain point that I think everyone experiences. I'm not sure I know anybody who likes having a password. So what are some challenges in organizations getting rid of passwords? And then what are some opportunities for people to go passwordless? And how does that come together? Why is it that we're not passwordless today?
Right.
But what's that opportunity? Because there's got to be lots of benefits going forward for enterprises and users.
Yeah, it's massive. And I use this, I'm dating myself, right? But remember, in the 90s, we had firewalls, right? And so that, because before that, and when the internet first became, a thing, and we were all trading information, we developed this amazing, Netscape and the Mozilla project, and all developed this, the Mosaic project, developed the first user interface that we could actually, and so, wow, was that exciting. And then everybody was around the campfire singing Kumbaya. I mean, it was great times. We traded information. There were no bad actors. And then all of a sudden, here come the bad actors. And so then we developed a firewall. Well, our pipes were too small and the firewalls would get clogged up. So we developed proxy servers, and then we developed content servers. And then we had to have content security broker type services. And so we had all these things. And I remember the first firewall that we purchased was this little, 1 or 2U, 4 or 5 inch tall thing. And then the last one we purchased, this Cisco product, was like half a rack. This thing was a monster, and it had these blades that we popped in and out, and they were incredibly expensive. You'd mortgage your house to go and buy this darn thing. And what happened was it eventually just exploded, right? And we ended up with all these very small microservice software products that did all of those functions. And that's how we evolved and kept up with the scale and demand as we grew through internet and the internet consumption. So why would we expect that identity is going to be anything different? It absolutely won't. It'll be the same exact thing. Where are we today? We're just on the beginning edges of that. Today, we're in these massive stack systems, right? These are G Suite, Azure Active Directory, incredibly valuable products, ForgeRock. I mean, Ping Identity, all these great things. They're great, great products. They serve their role very well. The problem is there's one door in and one door out. So if you want to eliminate the password, you're injecting some process into the middle of this massive system that controls the identity. It controls the service. It controls all ends. It's connected to all things. And that's the way we developed when SSO came on the scene, in the, whenever it was, late 90s, early 2000s. We had to develop it. Well, where are we going to connect this thing? Where are we going to tell this service to go to get an identity? Well, let's connect it back to our directory. It made sense at the time, and we're still there today. I contend, and this is partially because I have a product that does this, but also because there's others that are in the market now that are doing the same thing. And even within those big, massive systems, we're starting to see the modularity take shape. So do we necessarily need a massive storage system for usernames and passwords to be the same system that is controlling access control or access delivery policies? The answer to that clearly is no. We're seeing, the CASB systems came in and they enjoyed a good run, still, I'm sure, used. But now we're seeing these microservices come in and say, let me build a policy for Zoom. Let me build a policy for Slack. Let me build a policy. And that policy doesn't always end with Active Directory or G Suite, right? Sometimes it's something completely different. It might be Facebook, it might be Twitter, it might be LinkedIn, or it could be bring my own identity, right? Here's an identity that I have that was issued by the state DMV or whatever, and I can use that. So that in my mind is identity orchestration. And what we're seeing now are these microservices that are able to serve that. And I think what we're on the beginning of now is the fracturing of these massive identity systems. Same players will be involved, but it's not going to be one SKU number that we buy and deploy. It's going to be a collection of services that we subscribe to and implement that are going to allow our customers to build the policy and build the product they want. They may want to have a user come through and log into Slack using Active Directory, but they may want to do a biometric factor. They may want to do, all these things that don't get baked in the actual product, their identity management system today. So that's a really long-winded way of saying the problem is most organizations now are constrained by the product that they're using, by the product that they've invested in. And so they only have as many avenues to explore as that vendor allows. It's very hard to get in the middle of that process. So as that changes, and I think it is changing, we're going to see a lot more opportunities and a lot better options for us to provide our customers with more identity orchestration, which I think is critical.
Yeah, and it seems like with the kind of the vision around the identity orchestration that you described, and getting them, practical places to start and get onto that journey is, it will reap rewards. And certainly getting rid of passwords would be wonderful, I think, for most people. Yeah. Now, there is this notion of zero trust, and you referenced it earlier, and especially as it pertains to identity and the underlying data and the like. Can you explain zero trust and zero trust as it pertains to data as well, and just how you think about that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and in broad principles, zero trust is prove everything, right? So we don't let anybody in without having those different factors in the way. The complexity with zero trust today is much the same as the answer I just provided on identity management systems, right? And so you have, and even think about something like our banking, mobile banking today. I can grab my mobile device and I can activate application of my choice for a bank. It might do a biometric scan, or it might require me to do a password, and that's it. I'm in the door. That's it. The trust is over, right? So now I can hand my phone to anybody else on the planet. As long as that session's alive, they can just have their way. That, in my opinion, is not good enough, right? So zero trust to me is, okay, it's not only trust every interaction as it comes in, but what do we do with the evolution of that journey? What about the in-session trust? What do we have in there? And now, more than any time in history, we have access to biometric factors and things that are on our device that we know are there, right? So if somebody's using a smartphone for that interaction, we know the tools that are at our disposal that we can hook. So by baking in those biometric service provider type products and factors, we can make that connection much more strong, right? We can continually scan as long as that connection is active. If I turn my phone away, should it not lock, right? I mean, those are the types of things that are coming because of where we're at. So to me, zero trust is yes, it's about trusting those connections. And make no mistake, right? I'm all about moving the needle just a little ways. I don't want to try to move the needle too far. And we go in and say zero trust. In the example that I just provided, a bank is going to look at that and go, wow, hey, that's a long ways from where we are. And it's a big journey, right? Zero trust, the first thing we do in zero trust, in my opinion, is get rid of the darn password. we just talked about it, but there's organizations out there that are saying, okay, we're going zero trust. By the end of 2022, we're going to be a zero trust organization. Do you still use passwords inside your organization? Okay, then any initiative you have is doomed to fail, because as long as you have a password, I can breach it, right? And so I think, to the listeners that are interested in what that means and how to get started, I would say really reflect and see where your strategy is, but the very tactical things that you can control. I know we can eliminate passwords today. Are you still using them? If so, why? Let's fix that first, right? And then let's talk about the journey, how to get to, whatever your perfect vision of the world is. But we have to start small. And we have to start something with incredibly tactical like password removal. I wake up every morning and I want to eliminate passwords from the world. And I will say, once you live in a world without them, as you can imagine in ID Ramp, all of our services that we use, from our chat services to Zoom and all of that stuff, we don't have any passwords. We've just eradicated them from our organization. And my pain threshold is I don't have a very high tolerance for pain when I go to sign up for a new service. And the first thing they want to do is, create a password for me. So I would say if we can get that consumer, if we can get the consumer behavior thinking along those lines, we're going to see a really quick adapting thought process to getting rid of those passwords immediately.
Yeah. Well, and I fully appreciate the practical side of what you're doing, and that brings great value, as mentioned earlier. You've talked about, this notion of bringing your own identity. And so what's the future? If we get past the next steps, what is the future, and what is the implication of bringing your own identity?
Sure. Yeah, the future is, and 12 months ago or 18 months ago, I might have said, I think the future might be. Today, I'm saying the future is, because we're seeing here in the U.S., we're seeing cities and states investing and investigating opportunities for digital resident identification systems. We're seeing some states that are already issuing DMV credentials, right? And the Ontario, I don't know if you caught that announcement, but boy, 3 or 4 weeks ago now, they announced their new digital identity ecosystem, and that is built on really solid technology, interoperable, third-party verifiable, right? And these are things that are just a must. It doesn't do any good to create a digital identity system where the issuer and the verifier are the same person, right? We can unpack that a little bit if you want, but that's really at the core of this. We need to be able to issue those credentials in an ecosystem where third parties can verify that without coming back to the mothership. Absolutely essential and critical. Ontario is doing that. There's a couple initiatives in Europe that are going that direction, and some interest that we know we've been involved in here in the States doing the same type of thing. So once we get there, then the future is all of the services that we interact with, whether it's the public pool, the library, or Zoom or Slack, are going to be built to receive verification from a credential that they did not issue. And that's not the case today. Every service we interact with, we're verifying with a credential that has been issued by them, or in the case of federated identity in the enterprise or something, we're authenticating with a credential that has been issued by whoever the same person is that's verifying, right? The service doesn't verify that independently. They just say, oh, you're deferring my authentication, so go back here. And the same person that issued is doing the verification. That's in essence what's wrong. I mean, and that is the password. We just defined password, and that's what needs to die and go away. And so that's what the future looks like. The future looks like me getting a credential from, say, the DMV, and walking into a grocery store or a restaurant and saying, I want to perform some action that requires privileged, age verification, let's say, and the proof against that is being done on that credential issued by some other entity that we trust, not by us.
Yeah, and those kinds of use cases, get to reduce risk and help with security and the like. Are there trade-offs in implementing that can potentially compromise privacy and or anonymity, or is that not a concern? How do you look at that? Are there, said another way, are there any implications around law enforcement or national security, if I could even go that far with it? But like, what's the broader kind of consideration for the individual in the future?
Yeah, I mean, for the individual, for the consumer, it's really all good news. I mean, we have a data store that we alone are in control of, and it contains all of that information that that I value and that I have that I need to be in control of. And when any of that information gets disseminated from me to any third party, I'm in the middle of that transaction. So I see, oh, your credit history is being requested by your bank for the purpose of, whatever. And I'm in the middle of that process. Right now, it's an upfront blanket consent. We sign it once and it gets pushed downstream and we're not in the loop. So from a consumer, it's really good news. Now, and because we're breaking that and decentralizing that process, think about our threat surface, right? With all of that information housed in a single repository at a credit reporting bureau or a bank or even in our organization from a traditional identity management perspective, I as a would-be hacker know exactly where to breach. I know my target, and I know if I crack this nut, I have access to thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of the same type of information from multiple consumers. If now that is all decentralized, I have to attack every single smartphone on the planet. That's much harder to do. It's much harder for me to, it's much more costly for me to develop that type of an infrastructure. So that's really good news. We still have the challenge of consumers are consumers, and the third-party verification. We have to be careful how we structure that, how we set it. Governance is a huge deal. We have to know who we're trusting and who we're allowing to access that information, because it is possible for a consumer to just basically say, yeah, you can have all my stuff, and we don't like to think that they do that, but people do, right? I mean, whatever it is, I get a free Starbucks if I give you all this stuff, then great, I'm on board. So that's the only bad side with it is that the good news is we're trusting the consumer and giving them control, and the bad news is we're trusting the consumer and giving them control, and so eventually it's going to be it's absolutely required. There's no way we can continue on the current path of building data silos and ever expect that personal information is going to be protected or secured in any way, because there's just too many replicas of ourselves out there already, and they just grow every day.
Absolutely. Well, I know we were joking about, kind of a football rivalry between your school, University of Iowa, and my school, University of Michigan, and what a tough place to play it is in Iowa City. And I know you know a bit about how exciting it can to watch a game is there. And at the time of this recording, obviously Iowa is undefeated, ranked number 2 in the country, and they just beat up on Penn State in a remarkable kind of comeback, an exciting game. And I think maybe Michigan and Iowa will play in the Big Ten championship game this year. But my question really is, with all the tradition of Iowa Hawkeye football and, the tremendous ceremony with the children in the hospital that just inspires everybody. And, as I've heard you say, it really kind of gets your head in the right space and focus on what's right and what's important. Yeah. My question has nothing to do with any of that. The question is, because all that stuff is great. Yeah. Why does the University of Iowa have to resort to painting the locker rooms pink for the visiting team? I wish I could defend that one, but I have no idea. And I can't believe that as traditions go, right? I think the thing that the University of Iowa is doing at the hospital is without question the greatest tradition in NCAA history, right? It's amazing, because it doesn't matter who you are, where you're at, who you're cheering for. We're all one team, right, at the end of that quarter. So I love that. But boy, on the other question, I'm surprised that has been able to exist for this length of time. Wouldn't you think that they would do away with that? But I don't know, man. I guess somebody somewhere said this stuff makes a difference. Did it start with Hayden Fry? Was he the first that did it, or did it predate him? I think it was him. Yeah. I think it was him. And boy, I'd hate to argue against anything that Hayden came up with. Right? He's one of the best. So it is fun to see. Very good, and best of luck to Hawkeye football. It's certainly exciting to see them doing so well. So, one last question before we get to the crux of the podcast, the theme of the podcast question. So you're clearly an expert in identity. So what were you doing before ID Ramp, and kind of, and what did that trajectory look like, just to kind of set the stage for how you developed some expertise in the space?
Sure. Yeah. I started, many, many years ago, and I started on the network side. So, I worked for a distributor at the time that needed some help with networking support, and I was off to Cisco and Banyan and Microsoft and 3Com and all of the people of the day, and I was basically just loading up as many designations as I could. So I've got certifications all over the place for network related things. And I went from that into I started consulting for this organization doing network security analysis and reviews. So I went into organizations and really looked at all of their processes and tried to find the weakness of where they were the most vulnerable. And this was a long time ago, but boy, it started then, because guess what we always came back to, right? It was always the human factor. The networks were the networks. It was always the human factor. Well, in order to access this router, this switch, you need this password, and that password is post-it noted, to this guy's terminal on his desktop, and so it always came back to those types of vulnerabilities, and that really set me on the path for identity security. When I did a couple startups in the late '90s, was very fortunate to have a couple of startups that were acquired by some bigger organizations. And one of the things we did inside the second of those was we had a project with Microsoft where they were just getting started with single sign-on. So they had just acquired a company called Placeware out of Xerox PARC, and that became Live Meeting. So Microsoft had the first, it was like Zoom and WebEx, right? They had the biggest in the day. It was this brilliant product. And the challenge they had with it is they would go in and sell it to their enterprise organizations with thousands of users. And their solution was, send us an Excel spreadsheet or something. We'll upload all those user accounts into Live Meeting. Obviously, that didn't work. So we built a little connector that bolted onto Active Directory in conjunction with Microsoft. And then that became SSO. So it became single sign-on for the Live Meeting product. And that crystallized any doubt I may have had that identity security is where I was going to spend the bulk of my career. And the rest, as they say, is history. And we are now and doing things and in places I never could have dreamed, 20 years ago. And I have to say that the next 5, I think, are going to be more exciting than the previous 20. I think we're really set up now where the next 5 years in identity are going to be completely disruptive and transformative. And I just can't wait to see how it all plays out.
Well, no doubt with your positioning at ID Ramp, you'll be right in the middle of that 5 years of excitement. So we wish you well with that. Now, naturally, you've had successes. You're doing great things today. And, part of the theme of this podcast is to learn from, the tough lessons that we have. And we like to think about, and ask our guests what, if you really thought about it, what was probably one of the toughest lessons you ever had to learn when you got knocked down, you had to pull yourself back up and really kind of take inventory and make a change. Can you give us an example of that personally or professionally that really, shaped who you are and the leader you've become? Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, I'm sure many of us have heard this, and I will say I heard it early on in my career, and I never took full stock in it until I made the mistake. And then I realized the value of the statement. But you absolutely cannot change consumer behavior. You cannot develop a product, I don't care how cool it is, and expect that it's going to change the way people interact or consume those products. And I learned that one the hard way. We thought that the technology itself being more secure, being easier, all of that was going to change the way people interacted. And frankly, it just does not. So really, ID Ramp was born out of that lesson, right? ID Ramp became, instead of saying, okay, here's the next new great technology, everybody's going to use it. We went back and said, nope, let's try to understand where these organizations are today. Let's understand. And we lived that, right? We've got 20 years of battle scars working with large multinational organizations and how their identity strategies can play out. So we know how dysfunctional identity is, and it is dysfunctional in every organization. And we tried to build a tool set that allows you to evolve instead of waking up tomorrow and saying, we're going to use this new mousetrap that's better, stronger, faster. We really took a hard lesson there, and we realized that we had to go back and build the products that an enterprise or a public sector organization could use today that maybe didn't, solve all of their problems, but it solved enough of those pain points that it will allow them to kind of take that message forward and use that decentralized notion that we think is going to dominate, right? I think, self-sovereign, decentralized identity, bring your own identity, whatever you want to call it. I can't wait for it to get here. We're starting to see, COVID really compressed that timeline dramatically, because things that we never would have expected we could, do. We never expected we could pull off like a vaccine passport because of political, demographic, usage, whatever it is, pick your reason. But here we are. The world basically stopped, and we did what we always do and found a solution. So that was a tough lesson, it just can't be stated enough. You absolutely will not change. When consumer behavior changes, then there's opportunities galore, but you're not going to just do it, so it was a tough lesson, but I think obviously we're better for it. I mean, we have a better market message now and better customer traction because we learned that lesson. But it's a tough one to go through.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that.
You bet.
Thank you for being a guest in the podcast. May the Hawkeyes have an amazing season, despite their pink hot locker rooms.
That's right.
May they have a great season. So thanks for being on the podcast, Mike. Mike VC, the CEO of IDRAM. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Joe.
This has been an episode of Lessons from the School of Cyber Hard Knocks. The views expressed are those of the individuals only and do not represent Run Safe policy or position. Subscribe to this podcast at Lessons from the School of Cyber Hard Knocks on Apple, Spotify, or any other of your favorite podcast services. Check out Run Safe Security on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Our podcast is produced by Alex O'Shea. Our music is produced by Beckett Cerny. I'm your host, Joe Saunders, and remember, it's a hard knocks life.